As you recall, the overall goal for our work group is to identify and discuss and then ultimately recommend to the co-chairs priority issues for Montgomery County as they relate to income and stability. Now, you may recall that in our previous meetings, at least the last meeting, we shared information about the panel discussions. We looked at the themes, we looked at the recurring themes. We also talked about the criteria that was established to kind of to help us vet the issues. And we went through an exercise during the last meeting whereby we talked about teen unemployment and we compared that against the criteria. So that kind of a little bit of background. The co-chairs met with the facilitators, the staff, just a few weeks ago and took a look at the process that was proposed going forward, how we actually get to the point of identifying issues. The co-chairs modified slightly the recommendation, but they approved a process, and that's the process that we're going to be using today to help us begin to work through the issues that are going to be proposed. In that process, it was important to all of us, and particularly to the co-chairs, that we hear voices, that we hear the voices of the researchers who have access to lots of information that would be helpful to this process. It was also important and equally important that we hear from the participants. That's the work group participants. Issues that you believe might be important to you that have not been identified by the researchers. And then finally, it was felt important that we have an opportunity to score, if you will, those issues. I think that scoring would then represent some kind of prioritization. So it's important that you have a chance to, after hearing and learning about the various issues, to decide which are the most important for you. So a scoring process will take place at the end of this phase of the process. Now, the researchers' issues really have been determined in great part by their just knowledge of the subject matters that they're going to be discussing. They have a lot of data-driven knowledge that they've acquired over the years. They use lots of data. They collaborate with each other. So they will be bringing forth issues from their experience and knowledge. They've also used the community needs assessment to help them to identify needs that have come through discussions with broader groups of people in our communities. They've used the panel theme discussions. And then they've reviewed all of the issues that they're presenting have been reviewed against the criteria that has been established. Participant issues are going to be solicited from you. If there is a particular issue that you feel has not been adequately represented by the issues that are presented by the researchers, there's a process that we will describe later in this meeting that will help you to share that particular issue with us. The expectation is that issue would be written. It will be data-driven. We're not looking for strategies at this point. We will, in the next phase, be looking at strategies and soliciting support to develop those. But at this point, it's still issues that we're looking to receive from you. Once those issues have been received by us, they will be reviewed by the co-chairs, the facilitators, the staff, and the researchers, and reviewed against the criteria that has been established. Once that review has taken place, those issues that have been selected will then come to a meeting like this where they will be discussed in smaller groups. But I'll give you more information near the end of this session about how you can submit a participant issue. And then finally, the scoring. It's important that it be done confidentially and electronically so that we can look at the data in a number of different ways So somewhere probably near the early part of September, you'll be receiving an electronic survey, and every person in our work group will have a chance to score the issues that that have been presented. Now, for today's meeting, we have, for our work groups, we have six researchers. And while they have introduced themselves individually, I'd like to just share their names with you. Our researchers are Jane Dockery, Don Ebron, Sarah Payton, who is not with us today, Kathy Rowell, Richard Stock, who is not with us today, and Bob Stoughton. Today we're going to be hearing from Bob, Kathy, Don, and Jane. The researchers, again, will not be presenting strategies. They will be presenting issues. And I keep focusing on that because sometimes it's easy to use those kind of interchangeably, and that's not the intent. Issues are just issues. Strategies we will get to in the next phase. What we will have happen today is that the researchers will present their issues. They'll take 5 minutes. They'll present a particular issue to you. In small groups, you will discuss those issues, that issue. And once 20 minutes has elapsed or so, we'll come back and we'll have the next researcher present an issue, and you'll, again, in your small group, discuss that issue. In your packet, there is a form, and I think it's called participant issue analysis. Yeah, it's an issue analysis form. Each of you have several of those in your packets. I am suggesting strongly that you will want to take notes as you are talking about the issue in your work group, in your small discussion group. And the reason is that there's a lot of time that's going to elapse between today and the time that you actually score these issues in early September. So these notes will help your memory as you begin to prioritize those issues. You will not be asked to report out. So the discussion in your work group is just going to be within your work group. Then we'll move on to the next issue and you'll discuss that one. As you are looking at the issue, we ask that you vet that issue against the criteria that you have, and I think that information is in your packet. If you find that there is a particular, criteria, such as community support, if you don't feel that there's enough information available to you today, just pass that and keep moving on with the process. All right? Don't spend a lot of time on it. To give you a glimpse of our next two meetings, the meeting on the 27th of July, we will be, during that meeting, discussing the final issue. There are 5 issues that are researcher issues that we'll be discussing as a work group. We only have time today to discuss 4 of them. It's just timing. So that we're pretty sure that we will have one of them will carry over to our 27th meeting. So we'll discuss that one at the 27th meeting, but we'll also, during that meeting, have a chance as a large group to kind of hear and discuss the issues that were presented today. Because you're only discussing those issues today in your small groups, and for many of us, it's going to be important to hear voices from people in other work groups to get broader perspective on a particular issue. So during that meeting, you'll have a chance to hear a little bit broader discussion about each of the 4 issues that we're talking about today. Additionally, we will be bringing forth participant issues, okay? And we be discussing those in small groups. In our meeting on the 26th of August, we'll continue this process. There'll be a large group discussion of issues that were discussed in the small group meetings on the 27th. And we'll also do a small group discussions of participant issues that are presented. This seems a little bit confusing. There's a lot of detail. I guarantee you it's pretty straightforward. We're gonna do something to get you into smaller groups. We're gonna talk about the issues, and then we'll hear the next issue and we'll talk about that, and then we'll leave, and then we'll come back and we'll have broader group discussions about those issues. It's all straightforward. It's with the intent of just making sure that you have a chance to get as much information about the issues as possible during these work group sessions. Are there any questions about the process at this point? I'd like to say that if you do have questions about the content or the process as we are moving forward this afternoon, we have Beth Whaley and Jim Gross and Keith McAlpine, who are facilitators who can help us with process, and we have our facilitators that can help us with content. We're a small group. Just raise your hand or get up and go find one of us. We should be able to help you with whatever's on your mind. I'd like to introduce Bob Dalton, who is one of our researchers. His issue that he's bringing forward is concentrated poverty. Bob.
Okay, thank you, Marva. There's an issued paper and a copy of the PowerPoint slides that will be distributed as soon as the presentation is over when you start your discussion. The topic is concentrated poverty, and for purposes of today, we're using this definition: the geographic proximity of neighborhoods with high and very high rates of poverty. I need the next slide. And to remind you, this is a map that was in the community needs assessment that shows what concentrated poverty is in Montgomery County. The red are the areas, they're census tracts where the poverty rate is above 20%, and the blue are census tracts where the poverty rate is above 40%. So this is a good graphic description of what we mean by concentrated poverty. An updated map, this data is about 2 years old. An updated map will be available probably next week and sent out to you just so you get a more current version of it. On the next slide, we can see some data about the actual poverty rates. You see that in Montgomery County, poverty rate is higher than it is in Ohio and the country as a whole. We also show up here the rates for a couple of other levels of poverty. You must, most of you already know that poverty is basically, it's a snapshot taken by the Census Bureau when they sample what's been the income for the prior 12 months. That's how the poverty rate is determined. The poverty rate is probably lower than it really takes to live. What people use as a proxy for a living wage is a 200% of poverty rate. And once again, sadly, Montgomery County's 200% rate is higher than the state and the nation. Going the other direction, below 50% of poverty is often considered extreme poverty. And sadly, Montgomery County, essentially 1 out of every 10 residents in Montgomery County is experiencing extreme poverty. And again, that rate is higher than the state and the nation. In the next slide, we can see example of the racial disparities in poverty. The total Montgomery County population, 74% white, 21% black. But as you go down the poverty ranks there, the poverty and especially the extreme poverty, the racial balance changes at 53% white, 41% black. So this is another way that poverty is concentrated, not just geographically, but racially. Could also add that, not on a slide for this, that poverty is also concentrated in age. Childhood poverty is a higher rate than overall poverty or adult poverty, so poverty is concentrated by age. So why does concentrated poverty matter? Very simply, because place matters. We all have enough life experience that we've been in neighborhoods that have a lot of amenities, a lot of positive physical attributes, as well as virtual, intangible assets. And we all can know neighborhoods where those things are lacking. Quick thought experiment. If you're a family, if your household is in poverty, and you're growing up in a neighborhood where 40% of your neighbors are also in poverty, that's one life experience. Same family, same household, a neighborhood where there's only, let's say, 4% poverty. We'll think about the different circumstances that are in that neighborhood because of the amenities, the tangible and intangibles that are available. So very simply, place matters. Next slide. Very quickly, and when children are growing up in poverty, these are the kindergarten readiness scores of the districts in Montgomery County, poverty rate across the bottom there. The higher the poverty rate, the lower the kids' kindergarten readiness scores when they enter school. Next slide. You're going to get a handout. There's a lot of numbers on here, but basically what this shows is that the status during childhood, it goes across the chart there, growing up below poverty on the left, growing up more than twice above poverty on the right, and the outcome as adult. Lots of tremendous differences in people's life outcomes based on how they're growing up in poverty. It's very easy to see that this theme cuts across all the different focus areas, the health and the income and the education and life skills. And also, to go back to the community needs assessment, the community really surfaced the need to fight generational poverty as a priority issue. So when the handouts are passed out in a minute or two, you'll see there's some references to some research-based strategies for alleviating poverty, for responding to poverty, including some randomized controlled trials which have been done. That's considered by a lot of people the gold standard in fighting poverty. There's also some references on there to what we know about the brain science and poverty. And the next slide, just to highlight one of the problems facing families in poverty is the cliff effect that we've talked about before. Very dramatic. You'll get a handout where you can see these numbers better. But the hourly wage is going across the bottom. So as the wage is increasing up to about $9.40 an hour, you lose your first set of benefits for child care. You fall off a tremendous cliff. The vertical axis is basically your effective income, not actually your wage income. So you're falling off all these cliffs, and after you fall, in order to get to where you were when you fell off the child care cliff, you have to be around $18 or $20 an hour. So from $9 an hour to $20 an hour to recover all the losses of the cliff. So when you talk about the cliff effect, that's what we're talking about. And finally, in the last slide, poverty is based on income, the official measure, but there's a whole raft of other resources, access to which really are important for everybody's lives, and especially for people trying to come out of poverty. One of the ways that you'll see in the handout that approaches this are what's called the two-generation models, which try to capture both supports for the children growing up in poverty and the adults who are in poverty. And then the final slide is just a graphic to remind you that what we've just talked about is the tip of the iceberg, and your job in the next 20 minutes is to get underneath the surface and explore the rest of that iceberg.
Both Bob and I have had a lot of conversations about it. Our major point is that place matters and where you live matters. And neighborhood stability becomes an important part of that. One thing in Montgomery County that we now know is we do not have a neighborhood stability index, and many counties do. And I'm going to talk about what that would look like. And we don't have a map today of the neighborhood stability, but Bob is going to work on that. Thank you, Bob. And what we're going to do instead, you saw the opportunity maps that are on the table. So as we get into it, even though we don't have a map for you today, we're going to talk about that. So that'll be something I'll reference a little bit. So we look at neighborhood stability. There are a lot of definitions and a lot of ways of thinking about it. I picked the easiest one that would go up on a PowerPoint slide. In the issue paper, you'll see a lot more variables that people consider. So when you look at the definition, it talks about the physical, economical, and social components of a neighborhood. And in many ways, it's typically measured by thinking about housing and a neighborhood quality. So when you look at the 6 factors, this comes from the Center for Community Progress. They say that if you were going to develop a neighborhood stability index, you would want to consider these. It's issues of property abandonment and foreclosure. It includes property investment by owners. Concentration of poverty comes back to play again. Crime rate and home ownership rate. And I wanted to just share, as researchers, we have to share a lot of data and graphs and maps. I thought I'd share a story. I was at a Mega Baptist church 2 weeks ago, and they were having a community-wide meeting, and in many ways, the issues that we're talking about were the same issues they were talking. And there was a panel of elderly women and men sharing about their neighborhoods, and that they're embarrassed to have family and friends visit them in their neighborhoods. And they talked about that feeling of embarrassment and shame, even though their homes are nice. And I thought about that. It haunted me for quite some time, still does. I think about it every day. And imagine what it's like to live in that neighborhood. And these are folks that have lived there a long time. They have a lot of pride in their neighborhood. But that's that issue of neighborhood stability. So the component missing here, which you also saw on the slide that Bob presented, there are measures of neighborhood feelings. How do you feel about your neighborhood? Do you have pride in your neighborhood? Do you have pride in your community? How does it feel to live in this neighborhood? You don't see that on this neighborhood stability index, but I think it's something to think about as we move further. Next slide. So the other part of this that we do have good data on in Montgomery County is affordable housing. So this comes from the Montgomery County Needs Assessment, and we looked at affordable housing in the kind of the story, and if you look at the ones in yellow, these are where people have to spend more than 30%, that's the threshold of their income on housing. And in Montgomery County, and Dayton often is highlighted in the news that we have a lot of affordable housing, you hear that a lot. When you look at this chart, there are particular areas, and it's really the renter issue for affordable housing that's extremely problematic. When you look at the renter issue, we have a lot of people living in communities where they cannot find property to rent. That's at a wage or that would match their wages. And I think this is why homelessness, we have a lot of homelessness in Dayton too, which will be the 5th issue that we talk about next time. Next chart. Thanks. So why does it matter? Unstable neighborhoods lead to unsafe communities, safety and healthy. Unstable neighborhoods make it difficult to have opportunities, hence the opportunity maps. Unstable neighborhoods have a detrimental psychological effect, and in fact, I cited an academic article. If you get a chance, I gave you the link to it. It's a powerful article where they've studied the neighborhood effects on children and what it means to grow up in an unstable neighborhood. And the effects of social isolation and stress are really high, and it makes it really difficult to get out of those situations. They decrease the feeling of community, so we're getting at something that's not always measurable. We were to present data today, but some of this is difficult to measure. And then ultimately, stable neighborhoods exacerbate all the other social problems that we talked about. I'll add another component, and I think Bob said it, but I want to reiterate it. The way to think about this is when we think about children, if we think about the numbers of children in poverty in our county, if you think about it, and growing up as a child in a stable neighborhood, that's poor, and you're poor. Growing up as a poor child in an unstable neighborhood, there are real differences. I know because I was one of those. So I grew up, my family relocated, not that I think that's what families should have to do. We should fix the neighborhood instead of having to move. I grew up I'm born in extreme poverty. My parents moved. They moved to a better community. We had a pretty good school system. My brother, sister, and I all have graduate degrees. I'm a doctor, my brother's a doctor, and my sister has a master's degree. All my cousins, my mom had 8 brothers and sisters, are still in the neighborhood. All of my cousins did not go to college. Half of the females got pregnant as teenagers, and as of today, 8 of my male cousins have died of drug overdose. Wow. Right? That's neighborhood stability, and I wanted to bring a face to that because I think we get caught up in all the data, and that's the issue we're talking about today. And then finally, there's a lot of good research, a lot of good thoughts on what we can do, and you'll see that list on the back page with lots of resources. So thank you.
When you first talk about food deserts, sometimes that's a word that's been misunderstood. There's several definitions out there, so I want to bring you to the definition that I kind of use for food desert. This is the USDA's version. It has 2 qualifiers. First, a poverty rate of 20% or greater, or median family income at or below 80% of, for this case, Montgomery County's median family income. And at least 500 people and or 33% live 1 mile from a supermarket or large grocery store. I'm talking large grocery store, I'm not talking your corner store, I'm not like your Kroger or your Myers, the larger stores. So that's the definition for a food desert. And these are areas where people are not going to have access to healthy food, your fresh foods that so many of us enjoy. And a little bit, and you have this on your papers as well, and this is my census tract. Montgomery County has 153 census tracts. There's 29 of those that are actually food deserts, which is 19%. If you look at Dayton alone, Dayton has 59 census tracts, and 19 of those are food desert, which is 32%. So overall, 65.5% of Montgomery County's food deserts are located just in the city of Dayton. So we talk about why this matters. When we talk about health and safety, we talk about the fact that people don't have good access to food. That's one of the issues with chronic diseases, things like that. But also when we talk about income and stability, this issue is because they are in poverty. They don't have good neighborhoods that our grocery stores are going to move into the area. And they're not going to have the same access to good food that we have in some of the nicer areas. So another issue that we talk about is food insecurity when we talk about access to food. And food insecurity is having consistent access to food. And if you don't have consistent access, insecurity comes due to a lack of money or some other resources that happen sometime during the year. And I have here a comparison with Ohio, United States, and Montgomery County. You see that Montgomery County is higher in food insecurity than the United States and Ohio in 2013. And the little chart I have at the bottom shows that actually food insecurity for children and overall has actually increased in the last 2 years. So when children are hungry, when they go to school, they're going to have behavior problems. They're going to not be able to concentrate, not have the energy, increased hospitalizations, have oral health problems. You think of mothers that are pregnant, that have low access to food, don't have healthy food, increase of low birth weight babies, infant mortality, developmental delays in children. You think about adults that go to work hungry, decreased productivity. They're not going to actually be able to focus as well, trying to figure out, first, they're hungry, two, how's food going to get on the table? So there are definitely issues with food insecurity, both with health and safety and income and stability. One of the, I have under where you can learn more, I like to point this one out. The USDA, and I didn't know this until I did some research, actually has an atlas where you can go down and type in your zip code and tell you where all the food markets are in your area, what they sell, what kind of, if they take, WIC or food stamps or anything like that, or cash. So that's the resources to have just for your personal self. And where there's evidence-based practices, of course we have our school meals. The children can get meals, free meals at school, and WIC. And those are two things that we actually do right now in Montgomery County. Another one here I highlighted was the New York City green cards. These are like little vendors that come and go, and they go to different boroughs and they sell fresh product, and they can pack up and leave. So that was one of the interesting ones if you would pull that link and kind of see what they do there. And this map on the back is actually all the food deserts. You see they're mostly concentrated in the area of Dayton. So the pink are actually the census tracts that are food deserts where there's no access to food. People don't have access to grocery stores, like your Kroger's, and your my Kroger's near me has a sushi bar and all that good stuff. So they don't have the access to even fresh food in anything way. You have the little mom and pop stores in the corner that sell maybe old food or outdated and things like that, so they have the good access to food. So that's everything. Thanks.
But my topic is on stable employment. And so to get at a measure of stable employment, really we were encouraged by Barbara's group, the Dayton Foundation, to look into this a couple years ago. So I didn't have to do new research to discuss this. But what they had asked me at the time was, what's a good estimate for the chronically unemployed? And so what we dug around in the American Community Survey, which is the census, it asked the question, when did this person last work, even for a few days, within the last 12 months? Did they work, let me say it again, when did the person last work, even for a few days? And the options were, within the last 12 months, 1 to 5 years ago, or over 5 years ago, or never worked. And so what we did to look at the chronically unemployed or long-term unemployed was to take a look at those who said, the last time I worked was either over 5 years ago or I've never worked. So that's the variable that you see in the right-hand column on the slide. And what we found was if you look at people who are working age, that's all this is representing. So people from the ages of 16 to 64. we found over 55,000 adults in the county who have either not worked for over 5 years or who have never worked. And the table presents the results by age group. And so you can see the largest category between 50 and 64 years old of adults working age who've never worked, and that comprises about 20% of that age category. Of our 16 to 18-year-olds, 62% of them have never worked in that case. And then you see another large portion there of 22 to 49-year-olds, almost 19,000 who have never worked or it's been more than 5 years ago. You want to keep in mind that within this data, this question's asked to every adult, and so it would include those with a disability, for example. If you look at the ACS for the same year where we pulled this data, there's 4,000 unemployed adults who reported having a disability. So it counts for some, but certainly not all. And one thing Mike Parks had said to me a couple years ago when we talked about the findings, I said, but be aware that I don't have the margin of error presented on that table. And he says, I guess that even if it was plus or minus 25,000 people, the news still is not good here. So that's where one of his task forces took off. Just so you know, there's a total of 345,000 adults between 16 and 64 in Montgomery County at the time of this data poll. So 16% of them have either never worked or haven't worked for a long time. We saw from Bob some data regarding the benefit cliff, and we know that can have something to do with a person's decision to work or not to work. And so one thing we did besides that is there's a map in your handout that looks at labor force participation rates, and then behind that there's a list of occupations that we were able to identify that require little to no education, little to no additional skill set that would pay a living wage using the living wage calculator through MIT. And we selected occupations that are in industries that typically provide benefits, given the benefit cliff issue. And what we found, what you can see just by scanning down that last page is a lot of those jobs, if you look at the change from 2015 to 2023, are projected to decline in numbers. And you look at the annual openings, the total annual openings across those jobs was 1,100, which doesn't fill the gap of the 55,000, but is there to, just for more information. Also, we looked into a model that Joel Elvery, he used to be up at Cleveland State, had done, and it was looking at what difference would it make if we just raise people's educational attainment level, even if you move from one level to the next in terms of earnings. And you'll see that under the Why It Matters section on your one-pager, that even if we could just move 10% of the 25 to 34-year-olds in Montgomery County, it would generate over $13 million in increased earnings annually. So certainly getting people to work, we all know it matters. And then if you look at the evidence-based practice, how are we getting the long-term unemployed back to work? The USDOL just recently had a grant competition for the Ready to Work grants where they distributed $170 million. That was just last October. And I was looking at the awardees, and of the 23 agencies that awarded a grant, 16 were nonprofit organizations. A handful were WIBs, Workforce Investment Boards, and only one was a community college. And so as you look at, okay, who are the best practices? So I dug into those two. For example, Project Quest was one who won. WSOS up in Northwest Ohio was the only agency in Ohio to win. And I'm working with them on another grant so I can talk to them about it. And really what it comes down to with the long-term unemployed, it's about life skills, right? It's, the education can take care of itself, and each one of those agencies has a contract with a community college or someone to provide the education. But the big issue is the life skills, the support that's required to get them through. And what they told me was case management is important. It's provided through lots of those winners. They need guidance, career counseling, the weekly meeting, support services. They need work readiness, skills training, being taught about time management, stress management, goal setting, financial planning, and transition to employment. So I think it's important to look at both sides of it. It's not just about education, it's more about life skills is what the earliest best practices are showing us. Hope that helps your discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you mentioned a one-page why it matters.
It's just a one paragraph why it matters. It should be in the middle of the page.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Jane, what's going on with the 19 to 21-year-olds? Why is that number
So low.
relative?
Only 3 years.
Yeah, it's a small.
It's just a small group.
It is
That's all
that represents 13% of that group, which isn't really out of line with the other two groups. This group, this is representing 10% of that group.